So
So, welcome everyone to another workshop offered by the University of Kentucky and Office of Work Life and Benefits. We offer a monthly work life series on the first Thursdays of the month, and the topics are always sort of general work life topics that are good for any employee. And so today we're going to be talking about cultivating the good life. And we have with us therapist Eric Wilkinson. He's one of our mental health clinicians over in health and wellness, a part of our HR division team, offering therapy services to our UK employees and retirees. And I'll let Eric tell you more about himself. Thank you, Eric, for being here today.
yeah, thank you for having me, Izetta. Yeah, I am one of the four full-time therapists in UK Health and Wellness. Just to remind everybody, all UK employees, as well as their spouses, partners, dependents, children, are eligible for free counseling services. For every UK employee, you're eligible for 5 free counseling sessions every fiscal year, and those sessions are not part of your medical record and they're not part of any employment record because it's a benefit. We don't actually bill insurance or anything like that. So while we're all licensed therapists, we don't provide any formal diagnosis, but we all have worked in um, settings in the past where we're very familiar with providing diagnoses. We all have a pretty extensive, rich clinical history. For myself, I've been in this position for about 5 years. This topic, I love this topic. I've presented it to different groups over the last couple years. It kind of brings together several areas of interest that inform my clinical practice, including positive psychology, existential psychology, mindfulness based and compassion based therapy. And so I always like to start off by just letting you all see our team here. These are our therapists. If you go to the UK Health and Wellness page, each one of us has a bio that gives you a little bit of background about our training, the types of clients that we work with, in kind of any areas of specialty that we have. This presentation, I don't want to, I encourage you not to think of this as a to-do list. Um, as we're going to talk about later, often to-do lists cause more harm than good. I would encourage you to see this as a journey, as an adventure. I hope that the presentation raises questions or ideas for you that helps facilitate some self-reflection, some discovery and growth. I will be providing relevant research, and we're also going to engage in a couple small practices during this workshop presentation. So one of the things we'll be doing in the middle of the presentation is actually a writing exercise. So I would encourage, if you're someone who likes to write with pen and paper, to make sure you have some available. I'm someone who just like writes on the notepad on my phone, and that totally works as well. There'll be a series of questions that I will ask you to reflect on and respond to just for yourself. I'm not going to ask anybody to share the responses in a chat, but it is an activity that would require some writing later on. At the end, towards the end, time permitting, we will have a final activity that will hopefully give us an opportunity to share some of those responses at the end in the chat. I think it's helpful to just a lot of you spoke to the appeal of the title, The Good Life. The good life is a concept that's really goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle and other philosophers. Um, the way I'm referring to the good life today is kind of how the term has been used within the positive psychology tradition. Martin Seligman wrote a couple um, best-selling books. One of them was titled Authentic Happiness. Um, at one point, he was the president of the American Psychological Association. And so the framework that I have here on the screen is really comes from Martin Seligman's work. There's different ways to think about different arguments, I guess, or perspectives that you could say of what constitutes a good life. One perspective is kind of the hedonistic perspective. It's also known as the pleasant life. And this is a life where we look to maximize our sensory pleasures. It can be engaging with things like food, music. Um, I mentioned hot showers. I am a big water fan. So there are times where I will just, if I want to do some self-care, hop in and like just douse myself in a really nice hot shower. Of course, physical intimacy, physical affection, those are all sources of pleasure. Really, there's like play, sports, dance. I mean, you know what you find to be pleasurable. The pleasure, the pleasant life perspective is really about trying to maximize these pleasures while minimizing pain. One of the downsides of this perspective is that, well, there's an issue of practicality. We know that life consists of both pleasure and pain. Our culture tries or often talks about pain as if when we experience either emotional, physical pain, that it suggests that we're doing something wrong. But the reality is that all humans experience emotional, physical pain. We all age, we all experience losses, we all get sick, we all eventually die. We have people that we love die. So pain is just as much a part of human experience as pleasure. And so one of the problems with this perspective is that it's not pragmatic in the sense that we can't really eliminate pain. There's a Buddhist monk, Pema Chodron, who talks about how acknowledging that pain is just as much a part of life as pleasure is, better equips us to respond to pain in a caring and compassionate way. Also, we know that there tends to be diminishing returns with pleasure. So, while it might be very pleasurable to eat one cupcake, if we eat 10 cupcakes in a row, that pleasurable experience not only loses its value pretty quickly, but can actually turn into an unpleasant experience. Another view is this idea of the engaged life. And this is where we are really centering our life around activities and projects that intrinsically interest us, that challenge us, things that we want to do. And so, if you've ever had the experience, I'm sure probably everybody in here has had this experience of really being into some activity where you lose track of time. Like it's almost like the rest of the world melts away and you're just enjoying the activity. And it could be arts and crafts, it could be singing or dancing, it could be you're reading a great book, or if you're into writing, you're writing. It could be when it could be doing mathematics, it could be gardening. Anytime that we're really engaged in what we're doing, and it's kind of we find it to be rewarding. This is supportive of the idea that the good life is really about engagement. Another perspective is this perspective of the meaningful life. And this emphasizes bringing awareness to what we value most in the world, trying to align our life with our values. There's this definition of spirituality that I really like, which is just the idea that we're connecting to something bigger than ourselves. So the meaningful life is full of purpose, feelings of connection, awareness of what we value, and trying to live our life in accordance to what we value. And then I think it's helpful to think about while all these perspectives um, have, I think, valid points. Another way of thinking about it, as argued by Martin Seligman, is to try to cultivate a balanced life. And this is where you connect to different sources of good. So you do experience pleasure and happiness, and in an intentional way that you're open to experiencing pleasure, that you make sure you have time to engage in pleasurable activities. It also means that you experience engagement and at its highest level that is often considered to be a psychological flow state where you're really immersed in what you're doing, that you really enjoy what you're doing. And then, of course, bringing in our values. what we find most meaningful. Uh, we all have the experience of feeling like I am doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. Now, that might be a rare experience for us, but most of us have at least fleeting experiences of really feeling like we're connected to something bigger than ourselves. And again, it could be spiritual traditions. Psychologist Tara Brach, I like her language. She talks about the major religions as different wisdom traditions, but it also could be connecting with nature, connecting with knowledge, connecting with community. And so there's many ways to experience purpose and meaning. Another well-documented area of research within the positive psychology tradition is just identifying what are the different domains of life that are generally associated with happiness and well-being. One that's pretty obvious is in order to experience psychological well being and happiness, we need to experience positive emotions. And there will be, when we think about positive emotions, sometimes positive emotions just arise on their own. Somebody says something that we find is funny and we laugh, that feels positive. Someone that we're close to um, says something caring to us, that feels positive. We see examples from others of heroic acts or kind acts. That feels positive. But it's also, and we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, it's also important to intentionally cultivate positive emotions, to know what experiences really bring me joy, and not to view those experiences as something that we just do on the weekends or when we're on vacation, but try to reflect on where can I find joy in my day to day, the everyday mundane life that we live. Another important aspect of positive psychological well being is engagement. Again, being interested in things and actively participating in things that interest us, very important to overall life satisfaction and well being. We know that having positive relationships is very important. As human beings, we are social beings, we are social animals. We If we think about the existence of human beings, for most of our existence, we existed in small little clans or tribes, and we had close relationships to everybody in our community. One of the challenges of our current industrial or post-industrial society is the epidemic of loneliness. Many of us um, live lives where we don't get enough nurturing interaction with other people. We don't get enough nurturing touch. We don't get we don't get enough quality face-to-face time with friends and family. Um, we know that both throughout the lifespan, there's probably no more important aspect of living than positive human relationships. Having meaning and purpose is beneficial in so many ways. It provides us guidance and direction. We are born into this world where there's a lot of things that we just either inherit or are taught at a very young age. I mean, we are born into families, we are born into communities, we're born into a certain historical period, certain cultures. So a lot is given to us, but so much of our work as we move into our adult life is discerning for ourselves what is most meaningful to me. A lot of the folks that I see in my clinical work who are struggling with feelings of anxiety or depression or loneliness, often those feelings arise in middle age when people are in their 40s or 50s, sometimes in their 30s. And one of the reasons why I think this is a difficult period for a lot of people is that when we move into that time in our lives, we it's very rare to make it into your 30s and not to have experienced some significant loss. We have experienced, most people have experienced significant pain by that point in their life. It's also our bodies are aging, that can be challenging. But we knew that a lot of the things that we grew up believing that if I just do these three things, then I will be happy, that life is not that simple. Some of us think if I get a good job, if I find a partner, if I have children, then I will be happy. And so people often show up because they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're really kind of dissatisfied with their life. And I heard an interview once with the social worker Brene Brown, who talked about that the real work of life begins around age 40 because you have to start to really think about, based on your lived experiences, what is most meaningful to me? And then is my life in alignment with what I value? If not, where is my agency or power in changing my life? And so those are deeply philosophical, existential questions. If we don't examine those questions or engage with those questions, then we're really at risk for living a life that doesn't feel meaningful. And then finally, we know that human beings really benefit from being able to experience accomplishment. We like to set goals. We need to set goals. We like, if being able to learn new skills or learn new activities to pursue new projects. This is highly motivating, highly rewarding, and essential part of good living. I put this slide in here because I think, in addition to these kind of different areas of life, which we associate with positive psychological well being, there's also this helpful concept of radical self care. And and so, if we think about what radical means, kind of going back to the Latin, and it means to get at the root of things. Um, our culture, particularly, and I'm speaking of Western culture here, um, often is outward focused. Um, Outward focus in terms of achievement and social status, outward focus in terms of seeking pleasure from things outside of us. Um, we do not have a culture that generally emphasizes turning inward and doing a lot of introspection. And so a lot of folks struggle with self-awareness. There's been, a robust amount of studies out there that when people are asked what makes them happy, they often struggle to identify what truly brings them happiness. I have a lot of clients that come into my session and they may be struggling with relationships or struggling in their work. And when I ask them, I try to ask this of all my clients when I meet them the first time, when you're feeling good or when things are going well, what kind of things do you really enjoy? What are your interests, your hobbies? What are you passionate about? And a large percent of people have a difficult time identifying that because they just, there's not this emphasis on in terms of tuning into what matters the most to us, tuning into what feels nurturing, and then providing it to ourselves. So, this definition of radical self care is this idea that you embrace practices that keep you physically and psychologically healthy and fit. So, that includes things like making sure that you sleep enough hours and eating healthy foods and giving your body movement, making time to reflect on what matters to us, which I was just speaking towards, challenging ourselves to grow, checking ourselves to make sure that what we are doing aligns with what matters to us most. It's considered radical because it alters how we make choices about where we spend our time, our money, and where we put our energy, both in our personal lives, our home lives, and in our work lives. And so, if we practice radical self care, it means that we own and direct our lives. We choose with whom and how often we engage in our communities. And we are unapologetically ourselves in the face of unrelenting pressure to be otherwise. I think it's a pretty powerful definition, but I include it in here because it really gets at so many of the the different domains of good living that I described earlier. This is a slide that I've included because it's just another way of thinking about self-care. We can think about it in kind of in terms of self-care for the body, self-care for the mind, self-care in terms of the relationships that we build, and then the spiritual side of life. And I'm not going to read through the examples. I'll let you take an example, look at the examples of these different domains for yourself. But what I did want to one of the reasons I wanted to share this slide is because sometimes we might be doing really well in some of these areas. Like for example, in our mind, we might be really engaging with things that stimulate us intellectually. We might be spending a lot of time on things that naturally interest us. But we might be neglecting what's going on with our body. We might not be getting enough sleep. We might not be scheduling doctor's appointments when we need them. When we feel sick, we may not rest. We may just push through. And so, just because we're caring for ourselves in one area doesn't mean we're caring for ourselves in all these areas. And so, when you look at this graphic, you can kind of do your own self assessment. You can ask yourself, how am I caring for myself in terms of my body, my mind, my relationships, and my spirit? And if there is any one of these areas that really stand out that maybe you're struggling with, or you recognize that you're experiencing some difficulty or pain or hurt, or you're just not getting enough nurturing in that area, you can then think about, well, what kind of changes do I need to make in my life so that I can bring, for example, more meaningful relationship time into my days, or spend more quality time with the people I care about the most? Or is it important to me to actively seek out making new friends, and how would I go about that? So I think this is a helpful slide in terms of kind of thinking about your life globally and how you care for yourself. All right, I opened up this presentation by saying we're not going to do a to-do list. Instead, what I'm encouraging you to do is to reimagine and reorientate yourself to time, experience, and the experience of self. We often move through life with these stories about ourselves. We all have stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And so, for example, one a story that I once held that I gave up a long time ago was that I'm really good academically, but I'm not a good dancer. So I've always been someone that, for people that know me, that loves music, loves many different forms of music. My body wants to dance and move, but I used to hold many years ago. I've gotten through this. But many years ago, I held the belief that I'm not a good dancer. I think it actually goes back to when I was in middle school, and I actually went to a Catholic school, and they offered some formal partner dance classes, and I felt anxious about it, and so I didn't participate where most of my classmates did. In that experience, I then drew the conclusion that, oh, my everybody else knows how to dance and I don't. Um, by bringing to my awareness the story I'm telling by myself, I realized that that's just what it is. It's a story, and I started experimenting with being uncomfortable, allowing myself to dance without any formal training. And over time, I was able to let go of this story of myself. So that's an example of how we can bring mindful awareness to the stories we tell, and then find some freedom, some liberation from these stories. But we walk through life with these kind of blueprints for the world and blueprints for ourselves. And that often leads to living lives that are basically on autopilot, where we engage in the same type of behaviors, the same type of thoughts, and we have the same type of emotional experiences day to day. And it's almost like our life is living us instead of us living our lives. And so that's why I've framed this as reimagining yourself, reorienting yourself to to time and experience. And if we think about, how do we know if we're moving towards cultivating a good life. One way we could look at it is, are we deepening our social connections, particularly social connections that are healthy, supportive, nurturing, that we find meaningful? Are we living our lives in ways that really align with our values? Our values are simply what we value most about the world and most about life. Um, does our life reflect our values? As we move towards more alignment, we're moving towards living a good life. Being open to new and peak experiences. Most of us can probably remember what it was like to be a young adult, either at the end of high school or if we went to college, what it was like in college when everything was new and exciting. Unfortunately, for a lot of us, as we move into middle age, we just fall into these routines where we're not open to new experiences. And peak experiences, uh, they're called peak experiences because they're not everyday experiences. Peak experiences are where we are doing something that is really emotionally impactful because either it's something we've never done before, or it's like a culmination, coming together of a bunch of our values. Um, Peak experiences by nature don't happen all the time. But again, we have to be intentional about being open to the possibility of peak experiences, and then also having some idea of, you know, where are they likely to take place in your life. And so for me, it's hard for anyone, it's hard to have peak experiences when you are just grinding away day to day, trying to get all your tasks completed. So one of the things I know is like I have to set aside real downtime if I ever want to have peak experiences. And then I need to put myself either in situations or environments that are really energizing to me, aligned with my values. Now, doing those things does not guarantee I'm going to have a peak experience, but it does mean it's possible. If I don't do those things, it's highly unlikely I'll have this really deeply impactful peak experience. If you're experiencing feelings of burnout, anxiety, loneliness, or depression, which a lot of us, everybody has experienced these things at some point. A lot of us, I think, experience it increasingly in the world we live. We can think of deepening social connection, spending more time with intentional quality time with people we care about. That's an antidote to feelings of burnout, loneliness, anxiety, depression. If you value being in nature, going out and spending real time in nature is an antidote to feelings of burnout, anxiety, loneliness, depression. If we're doing, if we love a certain type of work, whether it's paid work or unpaid work, but we're not prioritizing it, and we make the decision, you know what, I really like to do creative writing, or I really like to play basketball, or I really like to knit, or to crochet. If you know that there's things that you deeply like, but you're not spending much time on it, and then you decide, all right, I'm going to align my life more in accordance with this value, then you're moving in the direction of good living. Um, and we know that when we seek out new experiences, this is one of the ways we grow. Every time we go to a new place, we meet new people, we learn new activities, we are growing, we're engaging with the world, um, and we're experiencing, new experiences. Spike your dopamine. I mean, generally speaking, they can be pleasurable or are pleasurable if they are within safe environments that generally align with our values. So we're going to kind of go a little bit deeper into this idea of reorienting to time and experience. Um, I think it's helpful. I'm pulling this from mindfulness-based cognitive therapy to differentiate between what they call doing mode and being mode. Doing mode is where most of us spend most of our work days and our work lives. It is um, task oriented, goal directed. It's a means to an end. It's also where a lot of us spend a significant part of our lives as caregivers or parents. When we are in doing mode, we're activating our sympathetic nervous state, our arousal state, and so we're on, like we're turned on, we're alert, we're focused, and that's all. Like those are, that's how we accomplish things. Those experiences can be really meaningful, but we also know that we can't like have our nervous system in an arousal state all the time. It leads to increases risk of all kinds of um, immune system disorders, all kinds of, we're at risk for higher levels of stress, higher blood pressure, cardiovascular problems. We know that we can't stay in this kind of arousal state all the time. But if we're spending like many of our days running from task to task, the neuroscience shows us that it actually creates a fight or flight response in our bodies. Our body feels like the world is on fire. We also know that even when we are not actually working on tasks, if we're running through the to-do list in our mind, we are still locked into doing mode. So the other way of being in the world with this model is being mode, and this is just where we're open to our experiences as they arise, our external experiences, what's happening in the world, and then internally, what kind of thoughts or feelings, physical sensations arise. We're just connecting with things. Being mode is about connecting with our experience in the present. It is not about like it's not goal directed. And so I provide some examples here. It could be like sitting around a campfire. That's kind of my one of my go-to metaphors for being mode. When you're sitting around a campfire, once the campfire is going, you're really not doing anything. You're feeling the warmth of the fire. You're listening to the crackle and the sounds of the fire. You can smell the fire. You're looking at the flames. Anybody, and that's probably most of us who have been around a campfire or a fire pit, know how immersive this experience can be. You can totally connect with it, and it can be very pleasant. Other examples are like laughing with our friends, where we're just sitting around and we're laughing, telling stories. It can be when we're singing songs or we're playing with our friends or playing with our kids. Physical affection can bring us into being mode. Physical intimacy can bring us into being mode. For most of human existence, we again, if we think about this from an anthropology perspective, we were in kind of like hunter-gatherer clans of 30 or 40 people. It's estimated that we did physical labor about 6 to 8 hours a day, and then we had a lot of time for rest, a lot of time for being mode. When we're in being mode, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. This is when we're able to rest and digest, our body can restore itself. It also creates a sense of safety and belonging. And so when we move from doing mode into being mode, we suddenly feel safe. We feel like, okay, everything is all right. The problem is that for many of us, we are the balance between doing mode and being mode is way out of balance. We do not have enough time downtime to experience being mode. And even when we have downtime, we have trouble not thinking about our to-do list, what's going on at work, all the things that keep us from experiencing what's happening right here and now. So when we think about reorienting to time and experience, this is what we're talking about, is shifting the balance between doing mode and being mode. I put this slide in here because this is a supportive, some supportive data about why being mode is hard for many of us. Americans just are not very good at engaging with leisure time. We take less vacation than most industrialized world. Most of us work when we're on vacation. When we're not working, we tend to consume an enormous amount of TV, which kind of pulls us out of our experience and opportunities for being mode. We know that if we can let go of doing mode and engage in leisure, that it can give us authentic experiences. We only really connect with people in the present and being mode. Like we can think about people all day long in our minds, but real connection happens in being mode. We can deepen those relationship ties. We can experience relaxation, calm, and safety in the body. We can enjoy nature and beauty and music and art. and we can just kind of be silly and have fun. If we think about what psychological flow is, it's really a blend of doing and being mode. And so psychological flow is when we're engaging with something that is very immersive, that we enjoy, tends to be things that we're good at, but yet still find challenging. And so again, this is an experience of like whatever activity is. It could be playing a sport, it could be some kind of creative activity, it could be gardening, it could be cooking. But sometimes we can get into these flow states where we are doing something that has intrinsic value. It's challenging to us. Now, the reason why it's a blend is because it tends to be goal directed, but also because it's so immersive, we're really present in the moment and present with what's happening. And so this is kind of a really beautiful place to be. And so when we know what kind of things create positive psychological flow, we can be intentional about trying to engage in those activities more often. I put this slide in here to think about unpaid and paid work. I'm not really, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm not really differentiating between unpaid and paid work. But I do think when we know what we value most, we can kind of see is the way that I am working, it doesn't align with my values. And so we know that builders are folks that tend to put a really high value on achievement, hard work, accomplishment. Builders are driven and engaged. They basically want to work all the time. They're um, really focused on their legacy. Um, they see work as a way to be healthy and not to get bored. Contributors, so none of there's no for all these different types or approaches to work, there's not a good or bad one. Okay. These is what's more important is like do if you are one of these, if you take one of these approaches to work, whether it's paid or unpaid, is this approach consistent with your core values? Contributors are folks that are looking for ways to give back. They often want to work in nonprofits. They're often interested in working in the community or for social causes. They feel happy, connected to others, content in their lives. That these are when they're doing what they believe in or care about, they feel good. Balancers are folks that tend to want to really prioritize the balance between work and downtime or being mode. They value their downtime. They value their vacations. They value not bringing home work home with them. When they think about what kind of work do they want to do, they tend to emphasize the relationship with colleagues or work that is enjoyable. Earners are folks that look at work as just a means to an end. It's just a way of paying my bills. Um, Again, none of these in earners for earners, they kind of decenter work. Work is not very important to their identity, whereas for builders, work is very important to their identity. So when you start to think about your value system, it can be helpful to think, well, does the type my approach to work, does it align with my values? Here's an example of some values. This is by no means an exhaustive list. We could have a list that is 10 times this long. I just provide it to kind of encourage you to look at it, see if some values stand out to you. And that's going to lead us into our guided practice. And and so this guided practice is actually coming out of the mindful self-compassion curriculum from Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. And like I said, if you have pen and paper, and you like to write that way, go ahead and get your pen and paper out. Otherwise, you can use the notepad on your phone. And and I'm going to walk you through this. And this exercise is called discovering our core values. So imagine that you're in your elder years and you're sitting in a lovely garden and you're contemplating your life. And looking back, you feel a deep sense of satisfaction, joy, and contentment. Even though life hasn't always been easy, you manage to stay true to yourself to the best of your ability. Which core values did you live by that gave your life meaning? For example, it might be spending time in nature, traveling or experiencing adventures, providing service to others. Imagine that you're there at the end of your life, looking back at this life well lived, thinking about What has been most meaningful to you? Go ahead and write down some of those core values, and I'll give you guys about a minute to do that. As you're looking back on your life, content and happy, you're writing down, being true to yourself, what were your core values? And if you don't finish all these steps, it's okay, and have to be mindful of our time. But we're going to go move to the next step, which is I now want you to write down any ways that you feel that you are not living in accord with your core values now, or ways in which your life feels out of balance with your values. For example, perhaps you're too busy to spend time in nature, even though connecting with nature is what you love most in life. So write down any ways that you're not living in accord with your values, core values right now, or ways that your life feels out of balance with your values. Now, if you have several values that you feel that you're out of line with, choose one that's especially important to you and write it down. Choose one value that's really important to you that feels a little bit out of balance or that your life doesn't align with it. Write that value down. And of course, we know that there are often obstacles that present us from living in accord with our core values. Some of these might be external obstacles like not having enough money or time. For example, maybe your job is really time consuming, so you don't have a lot of time to spend in nature. If there are any external obstacles, go ahead and write them down. Any external obstacles to living your life in accord with this core value, this one core value that you've identified, write down what those external obstacles are. Now, there also might be some internal obstacles that are getting in the way of you living in accord with your core values. For example, you might be afraid of failure, and what you really what it would take to live in accord with your values means taking risks. So you might be afraid of failure. You might doubt your abilities. Your inner critic might be getting in the way. Maybe you feel like you're not worthy of spending a carefree day in the woods. Write down any internal obstacles that come to mind. Now, I want you to consider if you were to express some kind words to yourself or some brought some warmth and compassion to your situation, is there any kind of self kindness or compassion that would help you overcome these internal obstacles, like your inner critic? Is there some words of encouragement or care that you could offer yourself so that you're able to take new actions to risk failure or to stop doing things that are a waste of your time? Is there some way you can express your values in your life that you haven't thought of before? For example, pursuing a job with a more flexible schedule, going camping more often if nature was a core value. So see if there's any words of wisdom that you could give yourself, some warmth or kindness that could help you to make changes so you don't waste your time doing things that don't matter, or that you try new activities, take new actions, take new chances. Write down those insights or those compassionate or wise words. And finally, if there are insurmountable obstacles to living in accord with your values, can you give yourself some compassion for that hardship? That is, not abandon your values in spite of the conditions. If the insurmountable problem is that you're imperfect, as we all are, can you forgive yourself for that too? Can you offer some compassion for the hardship you experience, not being able to live this core value more in alignment with your life? And so I provide this as an example of what I encouraged earlier, which is pausing, introspection. If we had more time, um, this could be a 30-minute practice. But what it's really doing is helping you to kind of let go of the daily grind and to, in a meaningful way, connect with what's most important to you and think about how can you give yourself more of that. If we think about emotional and mental health, we know that as we age, generally speaking, we get better at regulating our emotions. We know that when we connect with people, it gives us not only meaning and purpose, but there's positive neurochemical experiences, increase in dopamine and oxytocin, which many of you have heard referenced as the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. We know that when we connect with others, when we're present with others, and there's mutual respect and care, that we both people feel better. We know that movement and giving ourselves movement, it could be exercise, sport, dancing. We know that doing anything creative, singing and playing, physical touch promotes emotional wellness. And there's also this concept of equanimity, which is where we might have a strong emotion, but then we don't have a strong reaction to the strong emotion. So we might feel angry, but then we don't get angry at our anger. We might feel really sad, but we don't start to criticize ourselves for feeling sad. We're able to kind of see our emotions as experiences that come and go, and our sense of self is able to feel balanced. The way that we cultivate this equanimity is that we have to make space. We have to take time and allow ourselves to feel things and to let them move through us. When we experience whether it's physical or emotional pain or loss, we need to acknowledge our pain and to try to generate a warm voice of compassion, or to ask yourself, how can I care for myself in this moment? And when we experience positive things, it's really important that we savor positive experiences, that we really let ourselves enjoy them. Like we can look outside and it could be a beautiful day and we can just walk right on by and not really acknowledge it. Or we can pause and really enjoy the beautiful sky. And in that moment, we're deepening our pleasure, we're deepening our emotional and mental health. We know that much of what I've talked about here is that we can disrupt habits of thoughts and kind of the internal stories we tell ourselves. We can step back and say, I'm going to refocus my attention, um, how I spend my time on what's most important. These are different forms of mindfulness and discerning awareness. I'll put this slide in here, and of course, you all will get a copy of these slides. Here are some specific activities. Two I want to just mention very briefly: cognitive planting flowers and pulling weeds. This is a practice that when we have a really unpleasant memory or distressful memory that arises in our mind, we don't just ignore it or try to immediately block it out, but instead we name the feeling like sadness or hurt or loss, feelings of guilt or shame. We name what we're feeling, and then we try to generate some kind words in response to what we're feeling, like, I'm here for you, I care about you, I see how hard this is, I'm so sorry you had to go through this. So we acknowledge the pain, but then we also intentionally, whatever the pain, if the pain came from a relationship ending, we then shift our mind and think of its exact opposite. We think of a relationship that we enjoy, that has endured over many years. Or if the pain comes from failing or making a mistake, we intentionally think of a time when we achieved something we didn't think we could achieve. And so when we balance out kind of this unpleasant memory with a more positive memory, our mind then is able to integrate that in a more balanced way. The final thing I will note here is I love this activity of trying to savor small things, celebrate wins. It could be just naming 10 things, which is an activity if we had more time we would do, 10 really small things that you value and trying to come up with 10 different things every day. It could be at the end of the day, you ask yourself, what went well today? And you just make a list of 3 or 5 things that went well. All of these things as practices cultivate positive emotions. Finally, I put this slide in here. We know that positive social connection and relationship has all kinds of meaningful physical and health benefits. And so the slides, there'll be references if people want to do further reading, but I do want to take just these last couple of minutes. Azetta, I don't know if there's anything in the chat for me to respond to. If so, I can respond to that. Or if people have any questions right now that they want to put in the chat, I'll respond.
Does anyone have any questions? So far, no questions.
Okay. Well, so I'm hoping I know I've thrown a lot of information and practices compacted in a short period of time, which is how I tend to do these presentations. Um, in addition to the citations, I can also provide some recommended books if people want to explore some of these ideas or concepts, um, in an intentional way. Um, what I would say ultimately is that a big part of living the good life is connecting with our intuition, bringing awareness to what matters most to us in our heart, sometimes we have to think back to other times in our life when we are really excited or really motivated to remember, like, what is it that we really care about most. But that wisdom that is there is what I want to reassure everybody. It really requires the practice of slowing down and tuning into it. It's awesome. I appreciate the kind words in the chat. And yes, I will certainly provide some recommended readings for folks that find these topics and these ideas interesting.